Hello. I think we're good to go. But before moving forward, a small, quick introduction about Ayana. Ayana is a student and an ardent debater at Christ University School of Law with various stellar speaker credentials, including a number of breaks at World, which include 2021 Nepal Australs as well as UADC Bali 2021, and not to forget NLSIU Bangalore 2021 as well. She has also coded over five debate tournaments, and I think with that, she can share some of her knowledge and expertise in big tech with us. The floor's open to you, Anna.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to try and present my screen. Let me know if you guys can still see it. Yep. Does this work?
Yeah.
Perfect, great. Okay, so my name is Aayana, as I'm sure you've just heard. I'm going to be doing a matter workshop on big tech. The reason that I chose this particularly is because I think that a lot more big tech motions are coming up now than ever before. I think a lot of big tech companies have been in flack for a lot of the practices that they currently do, which is why I think this is an important matter workshop for you guys to have. I'm going to talk about three things. The first is what is big tech, and this is just going to be general debate world arguments about why big tech is good or why big tech is bad. The second, which is I think the biggest type of motion you see these days, is on breaking up big tech. So I'm going to talk you through the disadvantages and advantages of that. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the geopolitics in big tech. So I'm just going to get straight into it. So really quickly, what is big tech? Obviously, these refer to DC's big tech, which is the five biggest companies, tech companies, Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And it could, there is also a different tech hub, which is the Chinese tech hub, the Beijing tech hub, which this workshop will not be focused on until I talk about geopolitics and why specifically breaking up DC big tech is bad for Beijing big tech, right? But to understand why specifically big tech is called big tech, it is really important to understand what they're currently capable of. So just as a quick stat, only 7 countries have a GDP higher than Apple, and only 11 stock exchanges have a GDP or deal with as much money as Apple currently deals with. It is also really important to recognize that a lot of these companies have huge monopolies over their own sectors. So because of the fact that places like tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft do not run one specific product, they have a huge role in the ways in which they play. They play a huge role in people's lives. So this looks like you're going to Amazon for your marketplace, you're going to Amazon for a streaming service, a lot of things, right? The third thing to note about them is that they have resources beyond anything you can imagine. So this is pretty
Hi, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Aayana, but your voice is echoing a bit. Like there's.
One second. I don't know what to do about echoing, but I will just try and mute and restart.
Yeah, sure.
Is this better now, or would it help if I left the meeting and rejoined?
This seems a little better, but if you want. Hello? Yeah, Palak, you were saying something?
I think it's still echoing, but it's better.
Yeah, it's better, but if you.
I'll just leave the meeting and rejoin, unless it is that somebody's mic is unmuted and that's why it's echoing. But I can't really see someone's mic being unmuted. So I'll just leave it.
You can rejoin, that works.
Okay, hi. Is this any better?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, perfect. Great.
Oh, sorry,
So,
you can start.
no worries. Just give me one sec. Let me share my screen again. Yeah. So, like I was saying, these companies have resources and data that is way beyond anything you could imagine. And this is pretty intuitively true because places like Facebook, for example, own multiple social media companies through all of which through they accrue data, but also that they are so big right now that everyone uses them and there's no real opt out from them, that they just earn a lot of money that is just put back into R&D, that is put back into the resources that they currently own. So that's just basic things about big tech. From here and on, it might become a little fast paced. So the things that I'm saying will hopefully be simple, but I jump topics just because there's so much to cover under big tech. So at any point, if you want me to stop or slow down or re-explain something, please feel free to just unmute yourself. You don't have to put on the chat box. All of that's cool. Cool. So just quickly getting into Facebook, which is mostly just social media and the ways in which they monopolize social media. I'm going to be talking about 4 different things that I think could be interesting in the ways in which you debate social media. And these are particularly reasons why you spend so much time on social media or reasons why social media affects you so badly, right? So I've listed 4 things here. The first is bad forecasting. What that generally means is a behavioral change where you think that you're not going to spend a lot of time on social media, which is why you're just thinking that you will spend time, see, look at that one post and then leave. That obviously never ends up happening, which means that you waste a lot of your time on it. If you waste more time on it, that means that they can get more data on you, but that they can also push a lot more targeted ads to you, right? The second thing is an intermittent variable reward. So what that means is because you never know what you're going to see on your feed, perhaps you'll be able to predict what your friends have posted. Maybe they've told you on a different social media platform. You can see the problem with that as well. But you can never accurately predict people that you don't know. And given that most of us follow people that don't just exist in our close friend circles, that makes it more and more interesting to go on social media because you can never predict what you're going to see. Obviously, that means that the impact is just that you spend a lot more time, which means that we reach similar problems from behavioral change number one. The third change that we see is a confirmation bias. So what that means is that if you watch one video or like you happen to like one video of Ben Shapiro, you're going to constantly see videos of Ben Shapiro. You're going to constantly get that sort of political content that you can never act. And this happens because even if you do not like Ben Shapiro, but you've liked his post once, it is true that social media can't accurately predict what you do like. So what they will end up doing is just putting like videos that you've algorithmically liked. So that means that if you just pressed a double tap on an Instagram post, they don't know if you accurately like Ben Shapiro, but they will continue to show you things of Ben Shapiro because that's the information that they have about you. Obviously, this is bad because if you like one political spectrum, you don't ever get to engage with the other, which in general is not really broadening the ways in which you look at politics. And like social media in general plays a huge role in that. I mean, I'm sure like the Cambridge Analytica scandal is reason enough, right? The fourth thing I want to talk about is loss aversion, which is that you think that even if you know for a fact that nothing important is happening, or you know for a fact that you could probably take a detox, there will always be this weird fear of missing out, which is that you always think that if you disconnect, something really important is going to happen and everyone's going to know before you. Again, that means that you spend a lot more time on social media, and coupled with the previous confirmation bias, you never really engage outside of your political spectrum or outside of what your friend's political spectrum is, which is a really, really bad thing in terms of the ways in which you make your decisions or in terms of the ways in which you form ideas about the world around you. Cool. Now that that social media is done, we'll just a little bit talk about like AI. So I think that okay, cool. Anyway, I think that like the general thing about like artificial intelligence is that it runs on algorithms. What that means is that if you have a singular algorithm or you've come up with some data on a person, you're going to use that to continuously come up with more data on a person. This is on an individual level bad because you keep seeing similar content, but on a societal level, it can also have huge impacts. So I've listed 4 kinds of impacts that I think algorithms can have on society. The first is just on stereotypes. So one of the examples that I think is pretty prominent in debating, or something that you can use to prove why algorithms are bad in debating, is this criminal justice system that was used in Florida. What they did was just happen to label Black defendants as 2 times more high risk than white defendants, even if that wasn't necessarily representative of statistics across the world. It was representative of Florida. This is bad because it's confirming human biases, because these human judges are the ones that probably put Black people behind bars more often, even if they weren't as likely to have committed the crime, or even if they were innocent in some scenarios, right? So what that means is that algorithms basically just solidify human biases, and it makes it so much harder to fight against algorithms because you think that they're so much smarter than you, they're able to do things like calculations faster than you, etc. The second thing that I want to talk about is gender stereotypes. So in a particular training that was used in I think Facebook, what they did was pick out things from news articles, and they were more likely to probably to use non-gender neutral language. So what that means is probably referring to people as a chairman as opposed to a chairperson, etc., because that's the sort of content that we see as human beings, and that's the sort of content that is put out in news articles. So Facebook, to some degree, tried changing this, but obviously not all algorithms can be mitigated, and not all algorithms' faults can be found, particularly because you're not even looking for them. You think that the algorithms are always right, which means that a lot of gender stereotypes continuously exist in in AI, right? The third thing to talk about is just simple things that don't seem to have any effect, can just be amplified because of algorithms. So I think Facebook, either it was Facebook or Google, I'm not entirely sure which, had a hiring algorithm. And what that hiring algorithm did was just look through candidates' resumes and list the ones that they thought were had the most potential, or the ones that they thought should be rewarded the most by giving them an interview, etc. Unfortunately, they just happened to give Facebook and Google recommendations of men more than women. And this was just purely on the basis the words captured or engaged with, that men were more likely to just use in their CVs because they were more likely to have been given these opportunities. So you can see how this is really unfair and seems like something so trivial, but could have huge impacts on people's lives. For example, women not being able to get as good jobs, or not being able to secure interviews in huge tech companies, right? That's obviously really bad for women in tech policy in general. The fourth thing is a data underrepresentation. What this means is, because you don't have a lot of data on women and you don't have a lot of data on gender minorities, you don't account for them a lot, very often. So for example, in cancer, when in medical histories, when this algorithm was made to predict the risk of cancer in women, they just used a white data set of white women, and they didn't use it for Black women, which is why it was so much harder. The cancer, it just kept predicting cancer in Black women falsely, or it didn't predict it at all because you didn't have this data set. And this just occurs in a vast variety of ways. So it's not just white women, it's just women in general, it's just gender minorities in general, because you don't have enough biological data on them, or you don't use them when you're making the algorithm. The algorithm can't predict things like this. So it has just huge societal impact in terms of things in terms of things like your professional space, in terms of things like medical spaces, etc. Right? Cool. So that's on algorithms. So I hope that everyone's clear on what we've discussed so far in terms of what big tech really entails. Obviously, this isn't entirely comprehensive of everything that big tech entails, but I think these are the three most likely things we're going to see. The first is on monopolies and competitiveness. The second is on social media and what it does to you, and then the third is just AI and algorithms, right? Cool. So now we're going to move into breaking up big tech. So just to go back to the first part of the presentation that we discussed, the fact that big tech has huge monopolies. So obviously you could list a number of harms that happen with huge monopolies, a large part of it is market power, just the amount of resources they have, the ability to not opt out, because everyone around you is on Facebook or Instagram. So even if you try to opt out, you probably will end up downloading it again, etc. Right? For this, there is a concept that already exists. I'm sure you guys are all law students, so I wouldn't really need to explain antitrust, but just really quickly, it's basically just a collection of laws that exist that regulate the organization of business corporations. They're generally used to promote healthy competition in markets. Obviously, you're not going to get perfect competition, but they want more competition, so they wouldn't want Facebook to monopolize social media to the extent that it currently does. The problem with current antitrust frameworks is that it just functions on the idea that there is not a problem with a business unless they are making prices go up. Obviously, this is not true of big tech, because like big tech prices are much lower than normal prices in the market. So if you were to buy an ebook from big tech, from Amazon, it would probably be cheaper than buying a big book, like a book from a local publisher, or just an ebook from any other publisher, right? And like this is pretty interesting, because back when Amazon was dominating the ebook space and Amazon was like very ebook focused, a couple of other book publishers decided to collude. So I think the biggest one was HarperCollins, and what they did was raise the prices so that they collectively raised prices so that people would, even if people chose Amazon, the people that did end up buying from them were the ones that paid them a lot more. So in this case, the antitrust was filed against the other 4 publishers for for making the market uncompetitive by raising prices. So you can see how antitrust is often only filed when prices are going up, which never happens with big tech. So this is a problem, I think, just for 3 broad reasons. The first is the amount of leverage that big tech has in the market because it controls so much. So a quick example of this is a lot of people have noted, a lot of huge experts in the tech industry have noted that Amazon Prime isn't really profitable for Amazon. They have absolutely no reason to be in the streaming business because they make no money off of it. But the reason that they're still in the streaming business is because they want everything in the marketplace to be controlled by them. So they want to be able to control the place where you see ads. They want to be able to be the first person that you log into when you're trying to be relaxing. You don't want to probably spend time on their marketplace because you can realize that shopping is like cutting money on your pocket. What you will do instead is go to entertainment. So they want to be in the entertainment space as well. That means that they have huge leverage in markets, and they control vast parts of the market, even if it isn't actually profitable for them in that particular sector, because they can see it being profitable in other sectors. So you would run a lot of Amazon, ads about Amazon products, and you would people would go from Amazon Prime to buy those things, right? The second is just markups. So even though prices aren't going up to an extent where they compete with normal prices of other non-big tech companies, they still are going up. So I think in 2021, Amazon had about a 300% markup on some of their products, which is huge, but you don't necessarily recognize the difference because it's still cheaper than other products. I think the problem with this then becomes when you capture such a large market share, nobody's ever going to be able to pivot away from Amazon because it's convenient, because everybody around you uses it, because it's just something that you got used to, right? At that point, when they mark up even more, they mark up higher than local book publishers or whatever, local businesses, you're still going to continue to buy from Amazon. So it's just all a strategy to eventually raise prices, right? I think the problem with this is by the time they raise prices, antitrust will be ineffective. In fact, a lot of people think it currently is ineffective against big tech because you can't break up something that's that big, which is why the fact that antitrust is failing currently is a huge problem, right? The third thing that I think big tech has control over is access to data. The way they do this is, for example, Facebook has this algorithm where they basically just keep a track of other businesses that could possibly compete with them in the near future. So it could literally be a small business with 8 employees, but they will still have data on those 8 employees. They will use this data to either replicate your product or steal your product or try and capture your business, etc. And this is all access of data that they shouldn't have, but they have and they use, which again gives them huge power in the market, right? That one, antitrust law. Because of that, obviously, there have been vast number of debates on breaking up big tech. What that means is it could look like a bunch of things. But I think, one sec, I'm just going to check if, no, okay, I haven't put it here. So I think it could look like a bunch of things. It could look like Elizabeth Warren's approach, which is basically to break up big tech into smaller companies, not allow them to have mergers in the future, and not allow them to merge with itself. So Instagram and Facebook would become entirely separate and you wouldn't be able to do data sharing across. Or you would break it up to even smaller segments, etc. The second is to just not allow big tech to consolidate any further, which obviously would not be as effective as the first, right? And then the third would be to not allow big tech to be in its own marketplaces. So if Amazon is a marketplace. It can't have Amazon Basics, because it would, like, currently Amazon will always promote Amazon Basics, which is their own line of, I don't know, like kitchenware or like houseware, over any other line of houseware. Which means that when you first go on Amazon, the first thing that you see is Amazon Basics. You probably don't have the time to scroll through a bunch of like different types of, I don't know, soup bowls. So you will just buy the first one you see, right? So the third kind of breaking up big tech is just to not allow big tech to be a seller in its own marketplace. So the disadvantages of breaking up big tech would be like threefold. I think the first is that you get worse products for customers. This is just true because, for example, things like facial technology, you need a lot more data to be able to perfect facial technology. You need to have data like from different angles. You need to have data from different apps. So if I collate my Instagram pictures with my 2011 Facebook pictures, it'll just give me a better sense of the face that I currently have. So things like technology like this requires data. So you get worse products if you don't have this data. The second is because these companies have so many resources, they have the ability to push a lot of it into research and development. So this could look like being able to run Google Maps for free, even though it doesn't give them anything. It just gives customers the ability to use products of theirs for free, and they can only do this when they have this much money. The third is information. A lot of the information that big tech collects is actually really useful information. It's information that, for example, you could give to the police and the government, although I will flag of like Apple in the past has had huge problems with this because they think it's encroaching upon their consumer privacy. And that's something they really pride themselves on. So like a big issue happened when there was a criminal that was being tried and Apple didn't let the government look into their iPhone or whatever, right? So, but apart from that, I think there's a lot of information that they've collected about you that could be really useful for police and government work. The second is that it's really useful for medical history. So things like when you go to a hospital, they just have a lot of your data from previously and things like that. All this has happened because of the infrastructure that big tech creates. That just makes it simpler for you to be able to go and use products across different sectors, right? Cool. I will say that despite antitrust regulations failing, there are other regulations that currently work. What this means is that Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, all realizing that people are really starting to hate them for the amount of privacy encroaching that they do, that people are really starting to hate them in terms of the data. Although they can't opt out, they still want people to like them. So what they're doing is maybe not performative, but quite performative in my opinion, sort of like remote regulations that they place on themselves so that people don't get as angry with them. So a couple of ideas of this. I think the first is really important. The first is something that I think could be like many debates in the future, which is Facebook's oversight board. So what this oversight board does is it's basically collated 20 individuals with incredibly diverse backgrounds, some in policy, some in law, some in tech, and just incredibly different gender characteristics, racial characteristics, etc., that have just come together to advise Facebook on certain posts. And one of the steps that they've taken in the past was just Donald Trump's ban at the time, right? So that's one. The second is similar, like Twitter's done something similar. What they do is basically have a civil liberty algorithm, which is basically, it labels misinformation. And they've shown research that people actively introspect if they've seen warnings that this is misinformation. Obviously, it's basically a stopgap, if at all, because people don't always introspect, but people don't always care enough to even read warnings. So it's not really sure the impact of this, but Twitter says it has impacts, although it isn't clear whether it actually does, right? I think the third is just, remember we talked about facial technologies and the ways in which algorithmic biases exist. Places like Microsoft and IBM have discontinued these things, these facial recognition technologies. Facebook also discontinued their hiring algorithm where it happened to prefer men over women, right? So these are steps that big tech companies are taking. Although they aren't incredibly useful, they're useful in the sense that something is better than nothing. I will say that this is also generally indicative of trends of individuals to not want to antitrust big tech because you can recognize that they're useful in your own lives, right? If we were to break up big tech, so in the hypothetical that we were able to perfectly break up big tech, would that be useful? I think that in the past, we've broken up companies. We broke up Standard Oil in the 1970s. And what happened with Standard Oil was that it eventually reconsolidated, because you can break up Standard Oil into vast, like different parts, but just insofar as they exist in similar sectors and they aren't being competitive with each other because they're all part of the same old company, they will eventually be able to continue to keep their market share. Nobody can compete because nobody has the resources that they will ever have, which means that at some point you're going to have a reconsolidation of big tech that will happen in the future. The second is that the wealthy get wealthier. So this is what happened with the Rockefeller family. You basically broke it up into vast different parts and you had your own shootouts of like the bigger company. But the shootouts in themselves were so valuable that they ended up being more valuable than the big company as a whole, because each one being valued like whatever 600 million is probably more valuable than the entire company being valued like $7 billion, right? So they just get wealthier, which means that you're not really like serving the purpose of breaking up big tech in the first place. But I think the third problem that people have is that there are other places that should be broken up on these exact same metrics. So for example, Visa, although it isn't a tech company, it at some point, like I see somebody unmuted, so I'm just going to stop if you guys have a question. Oh, okay. Cool. So in the past, it did like a $5 billion acquisition of a tech company. So technically it is tech, but even if it isn't, it is also a huge monopoly over its own sector. So if we're applying antitrust on the basis of monopolies, then you're going to find it really hard to be able to stop monopolies at some points. And like Visa is like a monopoly that nobody really has an issue with, right? So at some point, you can't really use antitrust if you can't use it for other sectors, which is why it's really hard to use it on big tech. I'm going to get into the last part of my presentation now, which is geopolitics. Really quickly, just going to drink some water. Cool. This is really simple. I'm basically just going to be talking about China and like the effects that China currently has on the way in which the rest of big tech plays out. So in the beginning, we talked about the Beijing Tech Hub. What that is basically just Alibaba, like Didi instead of Uber, Huawei, all of these things that have like huge powers in China that are just basically allowed to run their own thing because the government needs the data from them and the government allows them to do whatever they want in China, and also makes it really hard for like the DC big tech to compete in China because these people get massive government subsidies, massive government concessions because they're all Chinese companies, right? When you break up DC big tech, that means that Beijing big tech has like literally the run of the world because it's never going to be broken up. The Chinese government will never allow that to happen. What that means is that if we think Facebook and Google are bad, we can only imagine what it's like to have China have all of your data, China have all of your information, which is why there's another incentive to not break up DC big tech because you have a geopolitical spectrum to it. The second thing I want to talk about is Huawei in itself. So basically, because in general, past issues have existed with Huawei, have existed with the ways in which Huawei breaches privacy, have existed also in the ways in which you're retaliating for like the US is retaliating against China by sanctioning Huawei. What that means is that sanctions unfortunately do not obliterate Huawei to the ways in which the West would like it to. That's because number one, like they have huge government backing, but number two, they have huge government subsidies as well. So even if you cut a lot of their customers, they're still going to be able to make a lot of money off of China and the Chinese government. So they continue to exist. So the problem with this then is that while sanctions work in a vast variety of places, they don't always work in big tech, which means that the West needs to come up with a new way to deal with Chinese big tech that they haven't really been able to do so far, right? The third thing I want to talk about is the power. So even if DC big tech goes to China, they have absolutely no power there. This is true for like a bunch of reasons, but I'm going to use the Apple example to explain why this is particularly true in this circumstance. The first reason is that Apple has huge encryption, like they hold themselves really highly in terms of their encryption values. We discussed this earlier when we discussed why Apple didn't allow like the government to use a criminal's data from their iPhone, which means they're really, really big on user privacy. But to function in China, they had to let go of that. What that meant is that they let go of all of their encryption technology. So literally, the government in China could hack into Apple, get a lot of all of the information that Apple has. They could hack so far that not only it would not only be information about Chinese individuals, but also information about other individuals in neighboring countries, or like things that like signals that go through China, etc. The second thing I want to talk about is the way in which Apple was banned from making a lot of like decisions that they would normally make. So they were banned from being able to protect their data in some ways. They were in fact being made to give a lot of data to the Chinese government to be able to operate in that place operate in China in the first place. And the third is just general government power. Because you're a government and you're a company, you need some amount of government leeway to function in that country. So you have to give way to the way in which the government works. That's just on China. But like quickly walking into what China's currently doing, and in terms of the China-Taiwan expansion, right? So because China is claiming ownership over Taiwan and has been for a really long time, the biggest semiconductor industry in the entire world exists in Taiwan. It's called the TSMC, something like that, the Taiwan Semiconductor Industry, something along those lines. And it's really important because all big tech from DC import semiconductors from there. It is super cheap. It does the round trip really well. But also the Taiwan industry has found the best way to be able to do that, the fastest, the cheapest way. And because of that, China getting control over Taiwan not only like messes with big tech in the way in which big tech can manufacture products, but also literally anything else. Because all government agencies to some degree rely on semiconductors, literally to make any product that involves the slightest bit of technology, you will need semiconductors. If China gets control over that particular industry, that has really bad repercussions for like the whole world, honestly, because you can't get access to those semiconductors that you would want, and you can't manufacture products for as cheap as you would have manufactured them before. So that's on geopolitics. That brings me to the end of my workshop. I'm sorry that it was a bit fast-paced and I jumped from different ideas to different ideas, and I wanted to keep this short because I know it's a Monday